She found the messages at 11:47 at night while her husband snored beside her, his phone left face up on the nightstand for the first time in 15 years of marriage. She read every single one. Then she set the phone down exactly where she found it, turned off the lamp, and lay awake until morning without saying a single word. By sunrise, she had already decided. She wasn't going to scream. She wasn't going to cry in front of him. She was simply going to leave, quietly, the way she had learned to do everything else in that marriage, without making a scene, without asking for permission. Before we continue, if you believe silence can be stronger than shouting, and that a woman's peace is worth more than a man's apology, take a moment to like this video, leave a comment, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to this channel. Stories like this remind us that sometimes the strongest thing a woman can do is simply walk away. Yolanda had been married to Charles for 26 years. They met young in their early 20s, back when Charles was working construction and Yolanda was finishing her certification to become a licensed practical nurse. They didn't have much of anything in those early years. They rented a small apartment above a laundromat, and some months they counted coins to make sure the electric bill got paid on time. Yolanda worked double shifts at the hospital while Charles slowly built his own contracting business, one small job at a time. She helped him with the paperwork at night, after her own shifts ended, sitting at the kitchen table with invoices spread out in front of her while he slept, exhausted from a day of physical labor she never once complained about sharing the burden of. When Charles's business finally took off years later, it took off completely. Contracts with the city, a crew of over 20 men, a house in a neighborhood neither of them could have imagined affording when they first got married. Charles became known around town, respected, admired, a man who had built something from nothing. Yolanda kept working at the hospital even after they no longer needed her income because she said the work gave her purpose, and Charles never argued with that. For years, their marriage looked from the outside like exactly what it was supposed to look like. Sunday dinners with the family, church every week without fail, a house full of grandchildren's photographs lining the hallway. But somewhere in the last 2 years, something in Charles had started to shift. He'd become distant during dinners, distracted during conversations that used to hold his full attention. He started working later, though the business hadn't grown any busier than it had been for years. He started keeping his phone closer, angling the screen away when it lit up at the table. Yolanda noticed all of it. She always noticed everything. But she told herself it was stress or age or the particular exhaustion that comes with running a business for 20 years. She told herself a lot of things because believing those things was easier than believing the alternative. That night, the phone stayed face up on the nightstand because Charles had fallen asleep faster than usual, worn out from a long day, careless in a way he'd never been careless before. Yolanda saw the screen light up around 11:30. She wasn't planning to look. She had never once in 26 years gone through her husband's phone. But something about the way it lit up, again and again in quick succession, pulled her attention toward it before she could stop herself. The messages were from a woman named Renata, someone Yolanda had never heard of, someone whose name had never once come up at a single family dinner, a single church function, a single conversation in 26 years of marriage. The messages went back months, photographs, plans for a weekend that Charles had told Yolanda was a business trip to Charlotte. A message from Renata that read simply, "I can't wait until you finally leave her." Yolanda read every single message. She didn't cry. She didn't wake him up. She sat there in the dark, the phone's glow illuminating her face, reading 2 months of a life her husband had been living entirely separate from the one she thought they still shared. Then she set the phone down exactly where she'd found it, face up, screen dimming slowly back to black, and she lay down beside him and stared at the ceiling until the sun came up. She did not confront him. She thought about it in the quiet hours before dawn, imagined the scene it would become, the shouting, the denials, the eventual half-hearted apology that would come only because he'd been caught rather than because he was actually sorry. She decided somewhere around 4 in the morning that she wasn't interested in that scene. She had spent 26 years building a life with dignity. She wasn't going to lose that dignity now, screaming in a kitchen over a man who had already made his choice months ago. By the time Charles woke up, Yolanda was already dressed, already calm, already moving through the house with a quiet purpose he didn't notice at first. She made his coffee the way she always did. She said good morning the way she always did. And then, once he left for work, she began to pack. She packed only what belonged to her. Her clothes, her mother's china, the set that had been passed down for 3 generations, the photographs from the hallway that included her face, leaving the ones that were only of Charles and the children exactly where they were. She called her sister, who lived 2 hours away, and asked if she could stay for a while. Her sister didn't ask questions. She simply said, "Come now," and Yolanda drove there that same afternoon. Charles came home to an empty house and a single folded note on the kitchen table. It read, "I saw the messages. I'm not going to fight you for anything. I just need you to understand that I deserve better than what you've been giving me for the last 2 months, and I'm not willing to spend one more day pretending I don't know that." If you've ever discovered the truth about someone you trusted completely and chosen silence over screaming, tell us in the comments, because what happened to Charles in the months that followed proves that walking away quietly can be the loudest decision a person ever makes. Charles called her phone 11 times that first night. Yolanda didn't answer once. He drove to her sister's house the next morning, and Yolanda's sister met him at the door and told him plainly that Yolanda wasn't ready to talk and that showing up unannounced wasn't going to change that. Weeks passed. Charles's calls slowed from 11 a day to 3, then to 1, then to occasional voicemails that grew increasingly desperate, apologies mixed with excuses, excuses mixed with pleading. Yolanda listened to some of them. She deleted most without finishing them. Renata, it turned out, had never actually wanted a real life with Charles. She wanted the version of him that came with money and status and a certain kind of attention. The version that existed at hotels in Charlotte, away from the actual weight of his life. Once Yolanda left, and once Charles's household began falling apart around him, dishes piling up, the house growing quieter and messier than it had been in decades, Renata's interest began fading almost as quickly as it had appeared. She stopped answering his calls the same way Yolanda had stopped answering hers. Charles found himself, for the first time in 26 years, completely alone. His business began slipping too, though not all at once. Small things first: a missed deadline on a contract because he couldn't focus, a crew member who quit because Charles had grown short-tempered and distracted on job sites. Word travels fast in a small business community, and within a year 2 major contracts he'd been counting on went to a competitor instead, a competitor whose reputation for reliability had never once wavered the way Charles's suddenly had. Yolanda, meanwhile, moved into a small apartment of her own, closer to the hospital, and picked up extra shifts, not because she needed the money, but because the structure of it gave her something to hold on to during the hardest months. She started attending a different church, one closer to her new apartment, where nobody knew her as Charles's wife, where she was simply Yolanda, a woman rebuilding her life one quiet Sunday at a time. Her daughter Michelle visited often, bringing the grandchildren, and Yolanda found herself, slowly, remembering what it felt like to laugh without checking her watch, without wondering where her husband actually was. Nearly a year after she left, Yolanda ran into Charles at a wedding, a cousin's daughter getting married at the same church they'd attended together for over 2 decades. Charles looked older than his 60 years, thinner, tired in a way that had nothing to do with physical labor. He approached her carefully during the reception, asking if they could talk for a moment. He told her he was sorry, properly this time, not the kind of sorry that comes from getting caught, but the kind that comes from finally understanding what was lost. He told her the business was struggling, that Renata had been gone for months, that the house felt like a place he was merely surviving in rather than living in. Yolanda listened to all of it calmly, the same way she'd read those messages that night, without raising her voice, without giving him the satisfaction of watching her fall apart. "I'm not angry anymore, Charles," she told him. "I spent 26 years believing that loving you meant staying quiet through everything. I'm not interested in going back to that version of myself, even for an apology that took a year to come." She wished him well, genuinely, and then she walked back to her table, where her daughter and grandchildren were waiting, where her own life, rebuilt carefully and deliberately over the past year, was still fully intact. If this story touched your heart, please like the video, share it with someone who needs to hear that peace is possible after betrayal, and subscribe for more stories that remind us dignity is never something anyone can take from us unless we allow it. And before we go, tell us in the comments, would you have packed your bags the way Yolanda did, quietly and without a single argument, or would you have needed to confront him first before you could ever find the strength to walk away? Sometimes the strongest response to betrayal isn't a scene. Sometimes it's simply closing a door quietly and refusing to look back. Yolanda lost a marriage she had spent 26 years building. But in walking away without a single raised voice, she kept the one thing that mattered most, the peace that had been missing from her life long before she ever found those messages at all.